Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's live stream. It's been a wee while since we've done one, and it's good to be back here live with you guys. So today we are talking about lotion, and so on Wednesday/Thursday, it was supposed to be Thursday, and then I kind of bunged up the scheduling, and so things ended up coming out mostly on Wednesday instead. Oops. I released a video and a blog on how to make a super simple moisturizing lotion. It used just 5 ingredients, and we spent a lot of time focusing on sort of why those 5 ingredients are, the 5 that I chose, because obviously if we're paring it down, we're trying to choose the most important things, the things that really need to be there. And then looking closely at process as well. And then I promised, we would do a follow-up live stream where we would talk about the questions that I got sort of in relation to that video, and then also questions that I just hear a lot about lotion. Kind of figured it'd be a good idea to kind of collect that all in one place. But yeah, so feel free to throw questions in the live chat as we go along, but I also have some notes just kind of off here. That's what I'm looking at, my notes off to the side here about different questions that I've heard about lotions or about this lotion in particular. I wanted to start with why your emulsion might fail. Honestly, the biggest reason your emulsion is probably failing is probably because there's either no emulsifier in there or not enough emulsifier or the wrong kind of emulsifier for your formulation. So I know I've definitely had people kind of come to me and say, I made this formulation that you've shared and it didn't work. How come? And usually with a bit of poking and like asking questions and kind of figuring out what they used as the emulsifying wax, it'll be either something like beeswax or candelilla wax or plain old cetyl alcohol. And none of those things are emulsifiers. So that's usually reason one. So if your emulsion has failed, take a closer look at what you've used as your emulsifying wax. If it's something that's sold as an emulsifying wax, usually that's okay, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the company has called it emulsifying wax, but if you look at the inky, it's just cetyl alcohol, and so that's not going to work. Similarly, if you've used something like polysorbate 80 in a formulation that calls for emulsifying wax, that's not going to work. And then, yeah, the not enough emulsifier as well, that can also be problematic. So if you have, used drastically more oil than the original formulation called for, but you haven't increased the amount of emulsifier, that can be problematic. Some emulsifiers will require a stabilizer like a gum or a gelling agent. So in my sort of initial get to know you experiments with glycerol stearate SE, I discovered that it really does need, about 0.3% of some kind of gelling agent. So some kind of carbomer or xanthan gum, hydroxyethyl cellulose, in order to keep things stable. Otherwise that emulsion will split on you. And then I've also found that if you're making a lotion with a very tiny oil phase, and you don't include any kind of additional stabilizers like a gum or a gelling agent, that can also cause the emulsion to split over time, even if your emulsifier it was used in the sort of technically correct ratio. That can also be problematic. Another question I often hear about lotions, and I get this a lot on one of my very, very first videos on how to make lotion from scratch, is, can I use this on my face? And the answer is generally yeah, but I wouldn't call it a face lotion. Usually when I'm making a face lotion, I'm looking to include things that are awesome for the face. So I'm usually looking at including maybe something like panthenol or aloe vera juice, N-acetylglucosamine. There's a lot of awesome things that you can put in a lotion to really amp it up and make it awesome for your face. And this formulation that we made sort of as part of this project that we're talking about today is really, really simple. So you can put it on your face, but it's, it's very basic. And if you wanted to make it like a super awesome face lotion, there'd be some other things that I would do to sort of make it a little fancier. And if you check out some of the formulations that I have shared on Humblebee Me that are called like face lotions or face creams, you can start to see some of the different types of ingredients I like to include when we're calling something a face cream. Can I use beeswax instead of emulsifying wax? So I get this question all the time. No, please don't. So I made an entire video to show you what happens when you use beeswax instead of emulsifying wax. And I would say one of the comments that I get most on that video is something akin to, "This is a load of bollocks," to borrow a British phrase there. And you absolutely can make, emulsions with beeswax, and you can. And I have a very old formulation on Humblebee and Me that uses beeswax and borax, which creates an in situ emulsifier, that combination there. But it's a very specific type of formulation, a very specific balance of formulation. And so if you take a formulation that is designed to work with an emulsifying wax, so something like Polo Wax or Olive M1000, and you use beeswax instead, it will fail. So yeah, that's that. And if you want to see it fail very enthusiastically, make sure you watch that video. Oh, we have a hello from Nashville. Well, hello. I hope you are enjoying some beautiful weather down there, and I would love to visit Nashville one day. Can I use a more natural preservative? So the one that I used in the video, I used Liquid Germal Plus, and a huge part of the reason I chose Liquid Germal Plus is because it's very easy to use. It works in a very broad pH range, and it's not easily sort of deactivated by the presence of some other ingredients. So it just it's a very, very easy preservative to use. If you want to use a more natural one of the first things that you're probably going to have to do is test and adjust the pH. Usually, the preservatives, the more natural preservatives, require a slightly acidic pH. So it's often below 6, but again, it varies by pH. So that's the thing you're going to want to be able to do. You're going to want to be able to reliably test and adjust the pH. So if you're a brand new lotion maker, you probably don't have a pH meter. They're usually kind of around $100. It's a semi-substantial investment, especially if you're new to making lotions. So you might not have that on hand, and so you might want to be choosing something with a broader pH range there. I put a bunch of links, like there's a ton of links in the description box. I went and added a ton of links in the description box. So I recommend clicking through some of those. There's a bunch on preservatives. So we see here, Anita's asking, can you use Optifin Plus instead of Germal Plus? And right there, you need to be testing and adjusting the pH because Optifin Plus needs a pH below 6. And if it's not, and if you don't know, it might not work. So you need to be able to test and adjust. So yeah. Please read through the FAQ. There's a lot of really good information there about preservatives. Can I make this without an immersion blender? Generally speaking, yeah. I have made a lot of lotions without immersion blenders, just sort of hand whisking things together. And it works. But a thing to note, I found that if you're using Polo Wax or emulsifying wax NF, it can take several days to get to the full final viscosity. I can remember some of those lotions that I made back in the day. I would put them in a pump top bottle, and for the first 3 days, when you pump them out, they would just kind of go bleh, like you had milk or something in your pump top bottle, which after a couple days, it would thicken up and it would have that lotiony consistency. But if you use the high shear blender, like an immersion blender, they'll thicken up much faster. I would recommend not using any kind of kitchen utensil, a powered kitchen utensil that's designed to whip things. So if you would use something to whip cream, I don't recommend using that for lotions because that's going to whip air into the lotion, and that's not usually a desired sort of end product. And kind of the next question that I've got written out here is, how do I reduce the amount of air in the finished product? So yeah, use the right tool. Make sure you're not using something that's designed to put air into the product. But also make sure if you are using an immersion blender, you're not kind of doing this with it and pumping it up and down, because that will also work air into it. And then make sure that your batch is large enough that you can keep the blender submerged, because if it's a really small batch, or sometimes the shape and size of your container can also cause this to be a problem, and your blender's not fully submerged, that's also going to be sort of sucking air in and working that into the lotion. How to add scent. So there's a few different ways that we can add scent to lotions. One easy one is hydrosols. So you can swap 20-30% of the distilled water in a formulation for a hydrosol, and that will bring obviously the scent of the hydrosol into the lotion. The more fragrant the hydrosol is, obviously the more fragrant your end product will be. So I have some hydrosols that are like very fragrant that I usually wouldn't use it more than like 20% because it can get a little overwhelming. But if you have sort of a more sort of gently scented hydrosol, you can use more. I do have a FAQ on sort of hydrosols and floral waters that I recommend reading. So I don't think I put that one in the description box below, but if you go to humblebeeandme.com/FAQ, you scroll through it. I think it's titled something roughly like, what's the deal with hydrosols, floral waters, etc. And you can learn more there. Let's see here. Up next would be essential and fragrance oils. So I noticed that one of the questions asked before the live stream started was somebody wanting to know how much essential oil the formulation can support. And honestly, it's a lot more about how much essential oil your skin can tolerate than how much essential oil the formulation can support. So I have a FAQ called basically how much essential oil can I add to this formulation, and that's also linked in the description box below this live stream. Usually you're going to be looking at like 3% or less. I usually like using less. Sort of as I've gone on doing this and learned, I've really dialed down the amounts of essential oils I use as I learn more and more about using them safely. So make sure you are researching all the individual essential oils that you wish to use, because some of them have different maximum usage rates that are often well below that 3% threshold. And it can also vary for things like rinse off versus leave on and face versus body. So make sure you're knowing that about all the essential oils that you're looking at using. You're going to put the essential oils or the fragrance oils in your cool down phase, and then you're going to be adjusting the percentage of water to make sure that the formulation still totals to 100%. And then one of our other options for adding scent is using ingredients that have their own natural fragrance. So a kind of a no-brainer one is cocoa butter. If you use some cocoa butter in your oil phase, that will make your lotion smell like chocolate. Or if you have a really gorgeous fragrant macadamia nut oil that smells all nutty and gorgeous, you can use that in your oil phase, and that will give a gorgeous nutty scent. Or I've also done this in the past. I've combined the macadamia nut oil and the cocoa butter, and then you get a gorgeous like chocolate nut scent, which is gorgeous. And then it's also worth noting, of course, that those carrier oils, they're going to contribute more than just their scent to the end product. So the cocoa butter contains a pretty good amount of stearic acid. It's quite a brittle fat, similar to like a chocolate bar. If you could like knock it on a counter, it'll wrap on the counter rather than just kind of go unless you live somewhere very hot. Cocoa butter melts around 34 degrees Celsius. So that will contribute some more thickening to the product as well, which leads us to our next question, which I see Pamela kind of touched on as well, how to thicken products. So there's a couple different ways. And again, there's a FAQ linked on this in the description box below. So one way that you can thicken your lotions is you can incorporate a gum or a gelling agent into the water phase. You'd usually do this at less than 1%, and that will contribute viscosity to the product, but without a lot of added richness. You can also swap out some of the ingredients in your oil phase for fatty thickeners, so things like cetyl alcohol, stearic acid, zetyryl alcohol, and those will also add body and thickness to the lotion, but without drastically increasing how rich it is. If you want to increase how rich it is, you need to increase the size of your oil phase. This is something I'm going to be going into in quite a lot of detail in the presentation I'm giving at the Unique Bath, Body, and Home Conference. So that's also linked in the description box below. So I'll be going over how to do that, but I've also touched on that in the, come on brain, in the blog post and video I did on how DIYing with spreadsheets. So I've also touched on that there. So I see Dark Moon Essentials is asking if there's a way to figure out a basic formulation of the lotion. And that's really like, that is what this class is about. So if you really want to learn how to like invent your own lotions and formulate them from scratch, I really recommend signing up for it. That class is this coming Friday. And there's also a bunch of other awesome things happening at the conference. And when you buy a ticket to the conference and it's all 100% online, you also get access to replays of all of the presentations. And yeah, there'll be a live Q&A at the end of my presentation on Friday as well. To carry on with talking about thickeners, do I need a thickener? Usually no. I made lotions for probably at least 4 or 5 years without incorporating anything like cetyl alcohol or stearic acid. And while I do love working with them and I do think that they improve the end product, they are not necessary. Especially when you look at a lot of emulsifying waxes that already contain a percentage of cetyl alcohol, it's sort of not surprising that it's not necessary. So yeah, you don't need one. They're great and a wonderful ingredient to fall in love with and start incorporating into your formulations. But if you're looking to buy as few ingredients as possible, it's not necessary for the success of your lotion. I had a question about reducing soaping. So soaping is kind of what happens when you rub the lotion into your skin and you notice kind of a white residue appear. So yeah, we call that the soaping effect, or sort of like whitening on rub-on. I do have some links to some resources on that in the FAQ as well. There's a few different things that you can try to reduce that. One of the easiest ones is incorporating a small amount of dimethicone, like 1 to 3% dimethicone, incorporate that into the oil phase, and that can really help cut soaping, as well as reducing any tackiness that you might feel on the skin and increasing slip. You can also look at incorporating a fatty alcohol, so something like cetyl alcohol or cetyl alcohol, instead of perhaps stearic acid if you did have stearic acid in your formulation. And you can also try switching up the emulsifiers. So some of them are kind of really known to be problematic for soaping. So Olivem 1000 is one of those ones where I've read that it is notorious for soaping. So you might try swapping Olivem 1000 for something else like Polo Wax, depending on what you're creating. And then some soap-based emulsifiers like glycerol stearate SE, its emulsifying powers come from the inclusion of some saponified stearic acid. And so that can be problematic as well. Why a lotion might get thicker far faster than mine do. I had somebody sort of say, hey, I made this formulation and like yours sure did not get thick nearly as fast as mine. One of them would be possibly different emulsifiers. I find that some emulsifiers will thicken up faster than others. Kind of going back to the mixing speed thing, if my mixer is like drastically slower than yours, which I doubt, but if you were hand whisking yours and I was using a blender, those would have drastically different thickening speeds. And then it does thicken as it cools. So if you were making your lotion in a 10-degree room and I'm making mine in a 30-degree room, Celsius, that would be a really, really unpleasant experience in Fahrenheit. It's like wearing a parka and snow pants trying to make lotion in like absolutely freezing temperatures. Yeah, that will also impact thickening. How to make a massage lotion. So this was sort of saying, somebody was asking, how can I tweak the formulation that you shared to make a massage lotion rather than just kind of like a lotion. And I'm going to kind of broaden this question out to how do I make a lotion that meets some specific needs? Consider the difference, to start with, between what you need and the formulation on hand. So if you are looking at making a massage lotion and you've made the lotion that I've shared, you're going to find that the lotion that I shared absorbs into the skin really, really quickly, and it's really lightweight, and it doesn't have like the amount of working time that you need on the skin in order to really function nicely as a massage lotion. So kind of going, all right, we need to add like some slip and sort of give it like a longer playtime on the skin. If you can, I really recommend researching similar formulations and looking for differences. This is often going to mean that you're looking at commercially available products that do the thing you want them to do, and then you go in and you research, you go look at the ingredients and go, oh, well, this contains a bunch of like X ingredient or Y ingredient, or they're using or sort of a different emulsifier. And that can be a great place to start to give you guidance on how to tweak the formulation. And from there, you'll want to research those ingredients and learn kind of what they do, what they can bring to a formulation, because some of them might just be different but not contributing to sort of those different characteristics that you want, and some of them might be, you know, that linchpin ingredient. And then from there, you're going to be working on incorporating those ingredients into your formulation, making lots of small batches, doing lots of testing, taking lots of notes to figure out kind of what needs to happen to take your lotion from something like lightweight and fast absorbing to like slower and longer working times. And I have an FAQ in the Humblebee Me Encyclopedia called "How do I incorporate X ingredient into this formulation?" And I really recommend giving that a read. I've written it so that it's very broad speaking, really like X ingredient as a variable. So that can start to give you a great way to think through how to incorporate new ingredients into a formulation. How to scale a formulation. So to start with, I want to say, do not ever scale up a formulation unless you've made it at least once. I'm sure we've all had this experience in the kitchen. We've been making food and you've found a recipe, or somebody has shared a recipe with you and said, "Oh, this is amazing." You're like, "Oh, great, I'll triple the recipe." And then it's done and it's awful, and or like you just don't really like it. And you're looking at it like, I don't want to eat this for the next 9 meals in a row, but it means so much of it. So yeah, don't ever scale up something if you've never made it before. Make sure you make it and you're happy with it before you scale it up. But I have an entire post on how to scale any formulation, which I've linked in the description box below. One of the key things I want to touch on is that you are always scaling up everything in the formulation. I've had some questions about, like, do I just double half the ingredients? Like, no, you would have to scale up every ingredient in the formulation to keep it working, to keep it the same. And then, of course, remember that things will take longer with larger batches. So it'll take longer to melt things. It'll take longer for things to cool down. And make sure you're accounting for how big the product will be when you're choosing the containers that you're going to be mixing it in, so you don't spray stuff everywhere. Touching on heat and hold, because I did have a question about that. So heating and holding, I've read described as you bring everything up to 70 degrees Celsius and you hold it at 70 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. I have made hundreds and hundreds of emulsions without ever doing this, and they have all been fine, including ones that I've kept on hand for upwards of 5 years, and they've never had issues with stability or anything of the like. So as long as when you're combining your phases, they're both hot, they're both the same temperature, which will always happen if you're heating them in the same water bath for an extended period of time and they're like sitting in the same pan, they're going to come to the same temperature. So that's awesome. And then as long as it's been hot enough that anything that needs to melt does melt, I've never ever had a problem with it. I've never had an emulsion fail and done the troubleshooting on it and thought, oh man, it was definitely like, because the 70-degree thing. Formula Botanica has a really, really good full blog post on sort of why the heat and hold phase is a myth, I believe is the title of the post. So I'd recommend giving that a read as well. And I wanted to touch on researching your ingredients, because this is really important. So I've done 2 huge blog posts on how to research your ingredients. Kind of part 1 is about all the different information you should gather about your ingredients, and part 2 is about where to go find that information. So really, 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 really recommend giving that a read, because there's a lot of valuable information in there, and researching your ingredients is it's a very important skill. So I can't tell you how many times I have been asked questions that I kind of feel like probably wouldn't have been asked if the asker had done even like a cursory amount of research into the product. So it's just a really good idea to know basic things about your ingredients. Like, is it acidic or basic? Is it liquid or solid? Is this an emulsifier or not? And another great place to kind of start your research is looking at the Humblebee Me Encyclopedia. So there's over 100 entries in there with a lot of information about all kinds of different ingredients, and I try to compile all the most essential information about those ingredients there. So that's a great place to kind of refer to as well. So that's actually everything that I have notes on. So I'm going to kind of refer now to the live chat and take a few questions there. Dark Moon Essentials, what is your favorite type of lotion and your favorite type to make? I generally find I like making lighter weight lotions that absorb into the skin really quickly and have good slip. That kind of probably my favorite type of lotion to make because it's also my favorite type of lotion to use. Um, I don't think I really have a strong preference between cold and hot process in terms of making, but I do tend to find usually the types of lotions that I reach for and use the most often are the hot process ones, so something using an emulsifying wax like the one that we're talking about today, rather than like an Aristaflex or a Cepamax Zen kind of cold processed emulsifier. Though I do really love those for face lotions because they can just be so gorgeous and lightweight, and because they're cold processed, we don't have to worry about heating up sensitive actives, so that can be also really, really nice as well. Anita, can we heat aloe vera to bring it to the same temperature as the oils in wax? So aloe vera is going to be going in your heated water phase, and usually, like if you were using something like an aloe vera extract that's very concentrated and used at a fairly low percentage, you can add that to your cool down phase. But usually if you're using an aloe vera juice, you're going to want to be putting that in the heated water phase because there's usually too much of it there to add to the cool down phase and maintain the stability of the end product. Let's see here. Pamela, glad you mentioned the temperature of the water in the oil phase. I can heat the water and the oil phases in the same pan for an hour, and the water is always 10 to 15 degrees cooler. Is this normal? That's very interesting. I don't know if that's super normal or not because I honestly don't check the temperature of my oil and water phases. If it's working for you, I wouldn't be too worried about it. Monique from Sydney, hello. Australia. I did live in Sydney for a while, kind of. I lived in Penrith. It's the sort of place where you tell people you lived in Sydney because nobody knows where Penrith is. And then when you tell the Australians you lived in Penrith, they sort of usually go, why? That's where my university was. So when formulating a lotion, is it important keeping the liquid phase and oil phase a certain quantity? Does increasing the oil component make a lotion thicker? So it's not so much... I say it's an important thing to consider because it absolutely impacts the end product. Increasing the oil component does make a lotion thicker and richer, assuming you are making an oil and water emulsion, as the size of the interior phase of the lotion impacts its viscosity. So it's definitely a thing to play with. One of the number one things I always recommend to new makers is when you're first getting into making lotions, make some very basic lotions, and the only thing I want you to change is the size of the oil phase. So try making like a 15% oil phase, like an 18, a 21%, a 25%, a 30%, and get a feel for how that impacts the lotion, just changing the phase size. So you'd be using the same carrier oil and the same emulsifier and all that. Get a feel for that. And then once you have a feel for how changing the size of the oil phase impacts a lotion, you can start to tweak other variables. Maureen, what is the maximum temperature you'd want your oil phases and water phases to be at before blending? Well, there's no need to boil anything. So I would say below 100 degrees Celsius, but warm enough that everything has melted. Somewhere around that 70 degree mark is probably a good place to shoot for. But yeah, there's no need to boil anything. I really like putting things in water baths because it prevents everything from getting too hot. Obviously, if it's in a water bath, the phases can't get any hotter than the temperature of boiling water. So that's 100 degrees Celsius if you live at sea level, and then it sort of drops as you gain elevation. See Monique saying, Penrith, why? And I was like, yep, that's the reaction I was expecting. And then Anita, a follow-up question, do we need to heat the aloe vera gel and not the water? So you need to heat everything. And then touching on the aloe vera gel, I don't recommend using aloe vera gel as an ingredient. So when I sort of say aloe vera gel, I'm talking about like the bright green stuff from the pharmacy. Sort of sold as aloe vera gel because it will have aloe vera in there, but it's also going to have other things like stuff that makes it bright green and preservatives. There's usually some fragrance. There's usually some sort of gelling agent. So you're not, don't use that. That's a completed product. Aloe vera juice, this isn't aloe vera juice, but this looks just like aloe vera juice. This is just distilled water. You can buy concentrated aloe vera juice, like powder, and then you can dissolve it at sort of the required rate, depending on how concentrated the powder is. So if it was like 100 times concentrated, you'd put like 1 gram in 99 grams of water. I would knock the water down by 0.5% and include liquid Dermal Plus so that you sort of have a shelf-stable solution that you can then weigh into things. Yeah. I see Pamela saying, asking, can I take your class on Friday without joining the rest of the conference? You can't do that, but after the conference is over, you can buy just my class. I'm not sure what the pricing on that is going to be like. And then obviously, if you're doing that after it's happened, you're not going to be able to participate in the live Q&A at the end because it won't be live. All right, well, I'll give you guys a moment if you've got any last minute questions to pop into the live chat. We'll wrap that up, and then I think I will sign off and go have a late lunch. Are you excited about being a speaker at the conference? Yeah, I've never spoken at a digital conference before, so it should be really, really cool, and I am pretty excited to be up like in a lineup with so many other amazing makers. It's very, yeah, that's really cool. Anita, would I need a preservative if I put aloe vera juice in my oil-based cream? Absolutely, you do if the aloe vera juice contains water, which it will. I have FAQ articles on this, like does this need a preservative? So I really recommend reading through those. Sophia girl, what is the culprit if an emulsion separates after mixing? There's a handful of things that could be problematic. We did touch on why emulsions might fail at the beginning. One of the big ones is that kind of might be problematic if the emulsion is separated after mixing. Your cool down phase might have been too large. So if it's much bigger than about 10%, that can be problematic. And then some ingredients can cause thinning, which can then kind of tip all the way into separating, depending on, again, a lot of things, depending on what else is going on. So some of the Optifin preservatives are known to thin lotions, which is a thing to keep in mind if you're formulating for Optifin. You might want to formulate the end product to be a little, formulate things to be a little thicker than you might have otherwise, knowing the Optifin is going to reduce the viscosity. Ceramide complex as well can cause thinning. Maureen has asked, can I offer tips for measuring small amounts of ingredients like fragrance, preservative, etc.? Yeah. So one of the biggest things that you're going to need to measure small amounts of ingredients is a really precise scale. So Maureen says she has a scale that measures less than 1 gram. You're going to want one that measures down to 0.01 grams. This is a scale I use for that. This is the Jennings JSR 200. So it has a maximum weight of 200 grams and it measures down to 0.01 grams. So there's a handful of things that you can do to make your life a little bit easier. One of them is investing in pipettes. So I've got larger pipettes here and I use an elastic band to hold them onto the bottles upside down so I can use them as much as possible. The plastic in them does eventually break down and they usually split on a seam and you'll have to throw them away and get a new one. But so that helps. So you can just add 1 drop at a time so you're not worried about like slipping and like oops. I've also got some really cute little tiny pipettes. I got these from SKS and I got like a pillowcase full of them for a fairly reasonable price. So I use these for essential oils and fragrances. For things like preservatives, I like swapping out the lids on the bottles or just entirely repackaging them to have the turret cap. That helps you dispense drop by drop without kind of constantly needing to work with a pipette. And I also find that things like liquid Dermal Plus are viscous enough that using a pipette is not the greatest experience. And then another thing that you can do with the scale, I find that sometimes those very first digits, like, getting that 0.1 gram to register, oftentimes you'll be adding, like, seriously, we're not there yet, we're not there yet. And then the first number it shows you is like 0.05 grams, like, fudge. So what I'll do there is I just won't tear the scale. So when I take, a little weigh boat or prep bowl, put that on the scale, I won't tear the scale. So it'll read like 92.25 grams. And so I just won't tear the scale, and I'll just add the ingredient until we get to 95.26 grams. And that works quite well as well. And then also for things that you are always using in very small amounts, another way to sort of assist you in measuring them out properly is to create dilutions or solutions of them. So we do this very often with hyaluronic acid. I have you create a 1% solution of it, and then we can use 20 grams of that 1% solution, and that's equivalent to 0.2 grams of the hyaluronic acid powder. And so it's obviously much easier to weigh out 20 grams than 0.2 grams. And I do that with citric acid too. I'll make a 50% citric acid solution, and then it's a lot easier to add. And you could really choose your dilution level depending on how precise your scale is. So if you wanted to be, heck, you can make like a 25% or a 10% solution, and then you'll know that, if you use 1 gram of a 25% solution, then you will know that a quarter of a gram, 0.25 grams of that 1 gram, is citric acid, and the rest is water. Let's see here. Can I add beeswax to my body lotion? You can. In my experience, it creates quite a tacky, draggy end product. It will also add viscosity. You might want a tacky, draggy end product. I usually don't, so that's usually why I don't do that. Let's see here. I made the frankincense lotion, which is a face lotion formulation that's on my blog, and a lot of the rosehip oil did not want to mix in, or it separated. That's peculiar. I'm wondering why you know it was the rosehip oil, because that should have been in the heated water or heated oil phase, and then you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell it was the rosehip oil. So it makes me wonder if maybe it was in the cool down phase, and then that might be the problem. What is the shelf life of this super simple moisturizing lotion? So I do have some FAQs on shelf life, and I recommend giving them a read. Generally speaking, I would say if you made it very cleanly, you could probably get a solid 2 to 3 years of shelf life out of it. But if you had like really dirty hands while you were making it and were like sticking your hands into things, obviously that's going to be drastically shortening the shelf life of the product. What weight of hyaluronic acid do I prefer? I usually go for low molecular weight. There's a wonderful, wonderful blog called Simple Skincare Science at, I think it's just simpleSkincareScience.com. And he has a massive, wonderfully researched, detailed post with a bunch of amusing GIFs in it, all on hyaluronic acid. And he talks about how to choose different weights of hyaluronic acid and kind of what they're good for. So that's very much worth a read. Monique wants to know why hyaluronic acid is so expensive. I'm honestly not convinced that it's expensive for any good reason, because I know when so here in Canada, it retails for like $5 to $7 per gram, which is like, that's kind of painful. But Pure Nature in New Zealand is able to sell it for, I think it was about $1 a gram, so like significantly less. And I remember them telling me that they didn't understand why other places sold it for so much money, because kind of they were able to sell it for significantly less without it being problematic. So I don't know why it's so expensive. My understanding is that it's all lab synthesized, so it's certainly not going to be from. It's not like rose essential oil where we need a massive amount of raw product to create a very tiny amount of kind of end ingredient. But I'm not an expert in the production of hyaluronic acid by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, well, I think that is it for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you're all having an absolutely lovely weekend wherever you are. And yeah, I would love to see you at different challenges that you might encounter with them and all kinds of things. Pretty good timing, because it seems like the connection has just cut out. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your Sunday.